So like mentioned, IndieBio is a life science accelerator based in San Francisco. At the moment, we are one of the most active investors in biotech around the world. In a little under 3 years, we funded 81 companies. And these are founders, PhDs, postdocs from academia. They're coming from every continent, every background, every race, ethnicity, religion. And the mission behind IndieBio, slides are messed up, is to help turn scientists into entrepreneurs. So we have a 4-month design-driven program to help companies get product to commercialization, raise money from investors, and build out teams and organizational structure. And the question we get all the time is, why now for biotech? There's IT, there's machine learning, there's software that's globally expanding, and biotech is just starting to come on the radar for a lot of people. And there's 3 global trends that are really driving this sector. The most important is the influx of talent. So right now there's tens to hundreds of thousands of PhDs and postdocs being trained every year all around the world. And the traditional routes, generally in academia, to become a professor, are becoming more and more limited. So people are looking at, how do we take our discovery and actually make an impact in the real world on people everywhere in every socioeconomic status? And helping that is the fact that doing science is getting much cheaper. There's much more computational power. There are new tools that are much more powerful. So we now have read, write, copy, paste for biology, which is helping people do discoveries at an ever-increased rate. So beyond just healthcare, drugs, medical devices, we're seeing biology as a technology that can impact every industry. So it goes consumer, industrial. We have companies who are 3D printing organs with lasers, people who are taking human neurons and actually putting them on a chip to do computation, and many other applications. But one of the biggest areas we're actually seeing change is in food. So we have a ton of companies in the future of food and agriculture, and today we have 4 really great CEOs who are going to talk about their technology and how it's going to change how we're feeding the planet. So I'm going to hand it over to them to talk about their companies.
Thanks, Alex. I don't have much clicking to do, so I'll leave this down here. My name is Alex Lorestani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Geltor. We're a business that makes money by designing and selling textures to other businesses. We do this using biology. The traditional way of sourcing texture-defining materials is by using highly abundant sources of proteins or other chemical inputs. So you can think of things like livestock. You heard a great talk about that yesterday from Modern Meadows team. Other inputs that have been used to define texture are petroleum-based inputs. What my co-founder and I kind of began the company several years back out of was a technical outrage, an outrage that we didn't have access to the sorts of tools in materials and consumer goods that have been used to produce fantastic products in the biomedical sciences. So we started to build a platform where we could actually use organisms to make these products at very large scales. And in the context of food, you can think about everything that you eat has some kind of a texture, right? Whether it's a gummy bear, which is kind of the classic use case of a gelatin, or even a sausage that you might have had last night. So texture is everywhere around us, and what we think about really hard is how we can use kind of nature's best ingredients, combine that with biology, and then scale it up with fermentation to actually deliver these products that add value in a way that a cow or a pig, for example, could not. I'll pause there and pass it off to the rest of the team.
So my name is Alec Lee. I'm the CEO of Ava Winery. We are making wine and spirits without any grapes or fermentation. So what we do is we take wines and spirits off the market, we analyze their molecular profiles, and then we source each one of those individual components individually and recombine them, basically recreate the original product. And so what that allows us to do is go to much more sustainable and scalable sources for each of these components. Grapes are a very fastidious plant. They require a lot of pesticides, a lot of resources, a lot of maintenance. And so when you go to different sources, for example, corn for the alcohol, you end up being able to reduce the water usage, for example, by 98%. You reduce the pesticide usage by orders of magnitude. And so this allows for sustainability advantages, but also quality control advantages as well. You end up with 0 pesticide in the product, unlike, for example, many wines, which are a crude agricultural product. It's hard to remove those pesticides from the grape skins themselves. you end up with a product where you can control the flavor profile to the T. And so you can match consumer demands exactly as they want them, and you don't have to adulterate the final product that you get. And so our goal in sort of approaching food here was to, to sort of steal Tesla's model in some way, create something that is aspirational for people. I think that many of us in this stage are working towards an ultimate goal where we can feed these 11, 12 billion people. And so our strategy for this is to really start at something where people aspire to this product and be able to work our way down.
Hi everyone, I'm Arturo from Clara Foods. And similar to Gelator making gelatin without pigs, Alec making wine without grapes, we're at Clara brewing the foods of the future, including the world's first animal-free egg white, without the use of a single chicken. And the way that we do that is very much through fermentation. Is that instead of having to use a whole animal to produce this one end product, is we design yeast to produce that using fermentation, and in the process, make it a lot more efficient and sustainable and ethical. And so our products are free of salmonella, any avian flu outbreaks. I know in Europe we had the pesticide scare for eggs a few months ago. And so from our perspective is, if we can make something that is just as good, if not better, but made in a much better and greener way, then the world will be better for it. And so fermentation for us allows us to create products that currently today are produced in really egregious ways. And so in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make the amazing Bavarian beer, we use yeast to convert sugar into protein. And just combine those proteins and add water to them to create eggs and egg whites that can look, cook, and taste like any other egg white because they're made from the real proteins that produce them. And although this sounds crazy, this technology has been around for decades. Before, cheese wasn't vegetarian because you had to kill baby cows in order to make cheese industrially, because the protein that is used to curdle the milk to make cheese could only be found in the fourth stomach of baby cows. From the 1990s onward, almost all cheese in the US and over 80% of the cheese in Europe is made using proteins that are made from fermentation, as opposed to the fourth stomach of baby cows. The technology was actually pioneered in the 1980s to make insulin. Insulin used to come from pigs. You have to kill a pig and then extract the insulin protein from their pancreas, and that's how all diabetics got their insulin protein from. And now it's virtually all made from fermentation. And so when people ask you next time what came first, the chicken or the egg, you can tell them that it was the yeast.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthias Viel. I'm co-founder and CEO at Viel. At Viel, we are developing smart and strong bees for crop pollination. By applying biotechnology to bee pollination, we are increasing up to 90% crop yields to farmers while reducing substantially bee population decline. People believe that bees are just producing honey, and they do not know that they're responsible for almost 70% of worldwide crops, right? See this image with lots of fruits, and see the world without bees, right? There won't be avocados, there won't be blueberries, there won't be tomatoes, there won't be apples, there won't be a lot of fruits, right? Just to give you an example of what we're doing. You see in this image, there are different sizes of blueberries. Do you know why they're different in sizes? The answer is bee pollination. Inside each of these blueberries, there are seeds, right? And below the blueberry, there was a flower that was pollinated by the bee, right? In the left side of this image, you see the bees pollinating the blueberry, and on the right side, you see the blueberry about to be harvested. Bee pollination is a very complex and inefficient process that farmers didn't solve yet. And we believe that with biotechnology, this can be solved and crop yields can be increased. What we do basically is we understand bees' immune system and study how their learning process is, studying their brain to teach them to be more efficient while pollinating blueberries, apples, avocados, cherries. We develop organic molecules products that by feeding the bees with this product, we can make the pollination more efficient. We've done lots of field tests, and comparing conventional bee pollination, we increased between 25 and 90% crop yields with a very sustainable solution, just by understanding better bees' biologies and enhancing their performance while pollinating crops. What's next? We're getting into RFID chips to understand better bee flight patterns and optimize pollination at the fields. We strongly believe that bee pollination combined with science is the next generation solution for sustainable agriculture.
Okay, well, thank you guys. So I want to start with the big picture. As mentioned, we're going to be approaching 12 billion people by 2100. But right now, actually, we have almost 8 billion people on this planet. Demand for protein is going up in every single market, much faster in the developing world than the developed. And we're actually still at nearly 10% of the population that's malnourished. So how are you guys picturing and seeing biology and the application of science to food production solving these types of problems?
I'd be happy to comment on that first. So just personally, looking at kind of the challenges that we see ahead of us with respect to scarcity, one of the main motivations personally for starting the company was the growing threat of antibiotic resistance. I was a medical student before I started the company with my classmate Nick, and I see antibiotics as one of our most precious natural resources. I know that a lot of the conversation is typically centered around land use, water use, greenhouse gas emissions, and those are obviously central to the conversation that we need to have around food. But I think when we look at the challenges that we're facing as a society, how we make proteins, how we build food products, have implications far beyond the kind of traditional metrics of sustainability. So for addressing these problems using technology, I think that we can use more defined means of production like biological manufacturing, more rigorously scientific methods for assessing what are the inputs that are required for this process. So we know that using fermentation, depending on the life cycle analysis for particular components that you're building, can provide significant reductions in land and water use, greenhouse gas emissions. But like I said, the impacts across the board can be much greater. So I don't really think of Geltor as like a health food company, but I do think it's fair to categorize a lot of what we're doing as like a public health food company. And I think moving forward, these sorts of considerations are going to be more important in evaluating the sorts of impacts that we're having.
Yeah, I think for us, the way that we see technology being critical is all about efficiency. Is that the current way that we produce protein is incredibly inefficient. For eggs, for example, and it's worse for beef and other animal proteins, but just to throw it out there, do you guys know how many liters of water it takes to make the 12 eggs that you buy at a grocery store on a weekly basis? Anyone want to throw out a number? How many liters? 100? Any others? 400. It takes over 2,000 liters of water to make a dozen eggs. And that's because not only does a chicken have to drink a lot of water, but the feed required to feed the chicken throughout the period of laying eggs is enormous. And so for us, it's really about looking at the future and seeing that ultimately, right now, these products may be pretty cheap, but as our climate changes, as there is more and more pressure on being very resourceful when it comes to using our precious resources, these technologies will be not only important, but critical. And I think for us, we see this as not only possible, but inevitable.
If I can just add to that. So I think there's already a very strong precedent for what we're talking about here. And if you look to science fiction, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum for how we perceive the future of food. One is sort of the Matrix future, where everyone just eats the same goop day in and day out and gets bored of it very quickly. And the other is sort of the Star Trek future, where you simply tell the computer, this is what I want to eat, and it makes you a filet mignon or whatever it is. And I think that that's the future that we need to aspire to for food, because humans crave diversity. And so this precedent specifically is vanilla. So a lot of people love this notion of natural vanilla coming from these orchid beans and all that, but the reality is that 99% of the vanilla used globally is synthetic in some way. About 85% of it is petrochemically derived. And the reality is that if you want to get vanilla extract from the vanilla bean, it's about $360,000 a ton. And so if we want to live in a future where certain flavor and certain experiences aren't purely limited to those who have all the money in the world, the way that we democratize these things is with technologies like this.
I personally believe that, agriculture in the next couple of years will get a very transformative approach to food production, because fertilizers can increase up to 3%, 5% maybe, or new genetics that take a long time to develop can increase just a bit. And we have to find for new solutions for agriculture. We personally believe that bees are a forgotten topic by almost every farmer. When I visit almond growers in California and I ask them what they're doing with their bees, they just answer, I just put them there and trust in God that they're gonna work. And I can't believe that big companies in the world are managing pollination in that way. Because if they do not have the bees pollinating their flowers, they do not have the fruit or the seed, right? So we believe at BeeFlow that the next generation of solutions for agriculture will rely on the better understanding of the ecosystem that surrounds the food production, right? And we seriously believe that biology has a very important role in this.
So one of the other very big trends that has been coming up in the last couple of years is around food transparency. So consumers are looking at where did our food come from, what's in it, and science-based companies can be scary there. How do you guys see your companies addressing transparency in food?
I think one inherent advantage in these processes is that we know every single molecule that goes into our fermentation tank, and we know every single molecule that comes out. When we compare the products that we're making to what's extracted from animal tissue, that's certainly not the case. Now, having a fully defined ingredient is something that people are interested in, and I think that when you're solving a real problem, people are open to solutions that technology can provide. And for us, it's about solving real problems using that transparency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, the transparency is absolutely critical. And I think that's part of the reason why people want to see our technologies really have that impact, is that at least today, there is very little transparency in the way that our food is currently made. And I think animal agriculture is probably notorious for that. At least in many states in the US, it's even illegal to go to a factory farm and look and videotape what is going on inside there. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And I think from our perspective, fermentation is such a clean way of producing everything from leather to gelatin, but also protein in general, that at least for us, our dream is that in our big brewery, which is what Clara will look like at scale, is that we actually have glass walls around it, that we have people go inside and only accept the work that we're doing, but embrace it as a new path forward. And I think for a lot of younger people is having access to not only food that tastes good and is accessible is important, but the why is even more. And I think it's becoming an increasingly bigger part of the consumer purchase intent of buying and really voting with your dollars and supporting companies that I think truly espouse the transparency ideals that they would like every company to adopt.
So I think a lot of the growth of the organic food industry is in some ways a response to sort of the lack of transparency in food production. And I think one of the challenges that all of us have is that sort of this idea of technology plus food sort of gets grouped into one big bucket. And so we, in some ways, to some people, are seen as tantamount to factory farming because we're adding technology into food. But if you think about, what are the key motivations for people when they buy organic? It's not that the word inherently has any meaning to them. It's that they think that organic food means no pesticides. They think it means sustainability, that it's a cleaner product, et cetera. The reality is most of those things aren't true. You still have pesticides in organic food production. They're less scalable. They're less sustainable. But that's sort of an aside. If you think about people's true motivations for buying organic, those are things that we actually deliver on in sort of not as an opposite end of the spectrum to organic, but if you think of it more as like a circle in this realm of organic where you know what's in it, it's cleaner, it's more sustainable. You go into a space beyond the farming and into this technology space where when you control all the molecules, you've actually delivered on all those things that consumers care about, but through a very different way.
So I actually want to kind of take that question to the next step. Science, like as we're seeing here, science and technology are weaving into almost every single part of our daily lives. But food is very cultural, it's very close to us. I think Europe is a prime example of that. So how do you guys think about addressing public concerns and fears actually about science into food? I think there's been waves of different scares across the world around technology being woven into this production.
I think we can learn a lot by looking at the successes and frankly the failures of the first wave of biotechnology to be introduced into food products. I think that a lot of the initial forays into this field, companies felt like it wasn't their responsibility to communicate what they were doing, why they were doing it, and having the sorts of conversations that we are now. I think that they saw themselves primarily as technology developers that were then passing that responsibility onto the farmer or onto the food producer. We all know now that that's an unacceptable and kind of, that's not the right playbook to use moving forward. So that's why I think you see all of the companies in this space working really hard, even at the earliest stages, right, to engage with buyers, to engage with end users, even if ultimately they're not the person that we're selling the product to. We want to let them into the solution that we're building from the start.
I'll go on a little bit of a tangent, but I'll make it quick. So 1973, Chateau Montelena made a Chardonnay that was entered into a competition in 1976, later known as the Judgment of Paris, because this was American wines against French wines, and it was French judges. And when they realized that the American wine had won, many of these high-profile judges tried to retract their statements. And it became this big scandal that finally American wines were great, and it sort of paved this way for the New World. If many wine lovers have heard this story and know about the 1973 Chateau Montelena, but very few people have actually ever tried this. Whereas if I say, how many of you have a sense of what the Mona Lisa looks like, probably all of you would raise your hands, right? Even if you haven't been to the Louvre. We live in a space where with the aspiration of wine and spirits, it's viewed as a form of art. And so why would you use technology to in some sense, dilute it or destroy it? And I don't think about it that way. I think about what we're doing as, adding computers to graphic design, right? Artists didn't suddenly disappear. There was just a new medium for that expression. One thing that our technology allows us to do is to sort of digitize and immortalize these works of art. When you create a digital flavor profile, you can recreate that indefinitely, and you can make that for other people to enjoy. And I think that doesn't just resonate with consumers who want to be able to try some of these very, great vintages, but also with the winemakers themselves. Many of them view themselves as artists in some ways, and they want to be able to share their craft with future generations. And they know that either they're going to sell out of a particular vintage that they love, or it's going to age past its prime. But the way that you immortalize something is you digitize it, like an old family photo. And so I think that's like one of the big things for us, at least, is how do we talk about this in a way that actually speaks to the different stakeholders, whether it's the producers or the consumers. And art, I think, is a really apt analogy in adding computers to that.
And I think the skepticism around consumers and food relating to science and technology, I think, goes to the myth that there is no science and technology in food today. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I think in terms of going more to the natural parts of this is how food should be made and chickens should be laying these eggs, is compare our process to the status quo, to the factory farms. That is anything but natural. Having chickens live in cages where they will never see the sun or walk on grass, where they are cooped up and have to live their entire days basically just laying eggs, when chickens, even 100 years ago, weren't able to lay an egg a day. We've essentially engineered them. If you all talk to me after the panel, I have this photo, and it just talks about how it shows what chickens looked like 50 years ago and what they look like today, and how quickly they can grow, where they can't even walk after a few months because their breasts are too big, and that's considered natural. I think is very, I think, very interesting, considering that that the lack of science in food today is truly a myth, and that we've essentially engineered our animals and our animal production process to an extent that these technologies are actually, I think, our best way of moving forward while feeding the planet, but also doing it in a much better way.
I think the answer to this question relies a lot in us as humans understanding better the processes and the biology behind what we're eating. Like a week ago, I was in a meeting with a strawberry farmer, and they told me he was a very important strawberry farmer in the US. And when I started the conversation, he just interrupted me and he said, "You know what? I'm not more a strawberry farmer, and I hate strawberries." And I asked, like, what? I hate them because I realized that I was applying so much pesticides and fungicides to produce my strawberries, then I cannot see them anymore, right? And I personally like a lot strawberries, and he make me think about like this, and I seriously thought about that meeting, that I didn't realize all the biology and all the processes that were involved in the food we eat, right? So I think it's on the customers to claim for this information and to understand better what we're getting into our bodies, because then we have problems, we have diseases, and if we do not claim them and we do not understand better the biology that it's behind, it's difficult, right? Mm-hmm.
So I do want to switch topics now a little bit to the operational level of actually having a food startup in a world that is mostly controlled by really, really big players. I'm not sure about Europe. In the US, there's a small number of large companies that own the vast majority of the food that consumers are eating, and there's huge farms that control most of the farmland. So you guys are interacting and playing in those fields. How are your interactions with the large food and ag companies? Are they evolving? Are they adjusting to the level of disruption that's happening?
I'm from Argentina. I'm a city guy. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires. And when I started working 2 years ago at Biflo and trying to understand how pollination was managed by big companies, I found that there was a lot of skepticism about it, because there was a lot of lack information being transferred from the science to the field, right? So I find this very challenging but promising because the impact that biotechnology can generate in food production is huge. Like, farmers are still being surprised about how we can increase 20% the blueberry production when they spent 15 years trying to get to those yields. So I personally believe that science can solve this issue by getting better communication between big companies and the research fields and scientists that are behind understanding the biology.
I think for me, I've been incredibly surprised by how receptive and excited and interested a lot of these large companies are with potentially working with companies like ours. I think for a lot of them, they realize that the food system needs to change, and part of it is because it's being demanded by people. That consumers with their purchasing dollars are creating trends that are continuing to grow and grow and grow, and essentially can begin dominating the industry. I mean, I think even on one topic, the animal welfare front, people were demanding cage-free eggs, and voluntarily, Walmart, Nestle, General Mills, Kellogg's, Sodexo, Compass, the largest companies in the world. McDonald's uses over 2 billion eggs just in the US and Canada every year. And they've all committed to going cage-free in the next 5 to 10 years. And for them, this is just a step along that pathway, and it's mainly to meet consumer demand and where it's going. The people are constantly demanding this, and they essentially want to offer a choice. So these companies don't want to be, quote unquote, evil. They want to cater to the consumers and what they want, and consumers now want sustainability. They want ethical behaviors. They want health. And now these companies are really trying to make a very concerted effort to deliver on that promise. And so from that perspective, I think I've been pleasantly surprised that they see technologies like ours being able to help them ultimately help people, so that the easy thing becomes the right thing.
You guys? Okay, so I have one last question. I want to open it up to people. I've had a lot of people mention they have questions for the panelists. So the last one is, how are you guys interacting with regulators? It's a big deal, I think, in most countries. Are they helping? Are they hindering? Are they communicating with you guys on a regular basis at all?
Yeah, we work across a variety of industries, from personal care and cosmetics, food, materials. So there are different regulatory frameworks depending on the particular industry that you're working with. What we like to do in the beginning is just open up a conversation and understand the principles that they have in place. What we've learned in every conversation that we had is that these folks and our team, we're all interested in building the products that are not just equivalent to what's out there, but better. And we all have the interest of the consumer in mind. So everybody's operating from the perspective of wanting to build safe products that are meeting or exceeding the existing regulatory frameworks. So we begin just by having an open conversation about what we're doing and how that fits into the existing model that's there, and what kind of future we might have to navigate. So people have been very open, and there's a lot of work to do, but I'm excited about where things are going now.
Any other guys?
I will say that I think for us, similar to Geltor, I think we've been very impressed with how receptive the regulators have been, and how open in terms of seeing these technologies being able to ultimately make food safer. I mean, at least for the FDA, that's their whole mandate, is trying to make food safe. I think in Europe, the regulatory process tends to be quite a bit longer, and so I think from that perspective, if there's anyone here that can do something about that would be fantastic.
All right, so we have a little under 10 minutes left. I want to open up to the crowd. Does anyone have any questions? In the front, third row.
Hi, I've got a question for BeeFlow. In regards to your bees, if you work with the increase with bees worldwide, do you then use the native bees of that country? Because a lot of the bees, for example, when I was living in Mexico, they had issues with an African bee destroying the native bee, and therefore the whole process of the ecosystems got disrupted. So how do you work with that, being based in Argentina?
Great. That's a very important problem that's happening in the world. You know, we are in Argentina, and we just launched our operations in the US, in California, this past December. So we're mostly working with honeybees. We're starting to get into bumblebees, and we're working with native bees, right? However, there's a lot of problems related to using bees that are not native for the ecosystem. For example, in Chile, there's a lot of imports from European bumblebees for tomato pollination, and because they're not native, right, they're generating a huge problem to biodiversity. For example, because farmers believe, or the guys that sell these products, they believe that you just put the bumblebees that they do the work. Like, they're crossing, for example, from Chile to Argentina, and for raspberry production, they're generating a decrease in the yields because they're damaging the flowers because they're too big to the raspberry flower. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very complicated issue, and the answers are in the better understanding on how we can manage pollination to increase crop yields.
Over here in the second row.
Thank you. I'm inspired by all of your companies. One of the questions that I have, with the exception of BeeFlow, is your companies are going to be disruptive, and at some point they're going to scale and have pretty substantial economic implications if everything goes as planned. Are you ready or prepared for the PR nightmare that may occur once you go up against some of the larger existing meat, dairy, a little bit less, but beverage industries?
We've already kind of started with that. I mean, when we first started talking about what we were doing, we were going to clone, I won't name them right now, but we're going to clone a very well-known champagne brand. And champagne's brands are known for being very litigious, and we got into a bit of a sticky situation with them within 8 days of the first article coming out. I think that as long as the players like us are responsible with how they manage the things that they're talking about, and co-opting the key stakeholders who might be negative press for us, that we'll be okay. And for us, the issue was resolved relatively easily without too much fanfare, despite we were lucky with quite a bit of press, and not all of it was positive. A decent amount of it was negative, and I think we sort of navigated that by not running our mouths and talking about how we were going to destroy other people's livelihoods. Like, that's not what we're about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, the two things that we are doing, and we'll see what I think help us kind of overcome some of those challenges, is transparency and partnerships. And so for transparency, I think that's, as a startup, our biggest asset, is that we can be honest about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and hope that people are excited about the work that we're doing, or at least know enough about it to know that maybe they won't go out of their way to buy our products, but at least they will feel comfortable enough because they can go online and find everything about it. I have videos, documenting how we actually do it, and I think that's going to be a massive asset for us, saying look, we don't want to hide anything. And I think that's ultimately where the PR challenges come in, when companies try to hide what they do. I think partnerships will be the second, kind of biggest asset for us. Is a lot of these companies, they don't want to die, and I think they see people really changing the industry and demanding different products. And so they're there to exist not only in the next 10 years, but in the next 50 and 100 years. And so you see companies like Cargill, for example, investing. Cargill is one of America's largest beef processors and producers, and they invested in Memphis Meats, which is this clean meat company making meat without having to kill cows. And Tyson, America's largest chicken protein company, invested in Beyond Meat, another food tech startup. And so I think a lot of these companies, I think what you'll see is a lot of the smart ones will want to invest or partner with these companies that ultimately will help us in the process really kind of have that impact.
The only other thing that I'd add to that is by focusing, and I think that's something that we're all doing here, is by focusing on real problems that the existing technology cannot solve. You're not displacing somebody that is doing something when you're building something that a cow or a pig or a chicken could not. And I think it's really easy to gain the support of incumbents and newcomers to the field. When you're doing something, if you're building a drop replacement, you are in for a dogfight. Right? But if you are building something that has a true value proposition outside of being cheaper or something else like along those lines, you'd be amazed at the allies that you can find in the existing industry.
In the back, green shirt.
Sorry. Oh.
Blue.
Next one.
Hi, thanks for the great Star Trek-y talk. I have a question about the winery and the eggs. Can you still call it wine if it's not made from grapes? And can you still call it eggs if it's not hatched by a chicken? And in that regard, about the winery, do you think it's possible that you can take your wine to France in front of these judges and fool them into thinking your champagne is better than champagne that comes from Champagne?
We've done just fine in blind competitions. And let's just say that there are judges out there who don't know that our wine isn't wine. As for whether we can call it wine, I think that's a regulatory question. But the question that you have to ask is wine a product or is it a process? And if it's a process, then what we make isn't wine. But if wine is the thing that comes in a 750 ml bottle and tastes like a cab and gives you all that same experience, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then as far as we're concerned, is a duck. We, again, want to be transparent about what it is that we're making. So we don't want to sort of pull the wool over consumers' eyes and make them think that this is a grape-grown product. For us, the technology that goes into it is critical to our mission as a brand. And so I think that our conversation with regulators is centered on that point, that we want them to be able, we want to get as close as a line without crossing it. And that's right. So champagne's not the only one with issues like that. Bourbon is similar, tequila is similar. But ultimately, what regulators want is transparency as well. And so if you have a product on the shelf that says, masticated protein of blah, blah, blah coming from yeast that, for all intents and purposes, is like an egg white, or in our case, is like, let's say, a tequila or a whiskey, that's less descriptive, that's less transparent to the consumer than just telling them what it's intended to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, even if we could, I think we would want to be able to highlight the differences, because I think that's really what makes us special and different.
I think we have time for one last question. In the gray.
Yeah, thanks. Picking up on the question from our colleague from WWF, we see the word trust coming up a lot here on the walls. How do you create trust when something is new, something like the wine looks like a copy, a clone, a, dare I say, fake? Even if it tastes the same, it's something that people put into their mouth and into their stomach. So it's really something which where trust is really the most important currency that you have or capital you have. How do you create that? You talk a lot about transparency. What is the narrative that you keep telling outside?
Yeah, I can make a comment on this. So, one thing that we found with particularly collagens and gelatins is that, first of all, because it's an ingredient, people typically think about it in terms of the functionality that it's delivering. So that already kind of de-romanticizes this food product. Second of all, when people actually learn where collagen and gelatin is coming from today, it is horrifying, to put it charitably. So when people learn that you can build the same or typically a better ingredient using a process that is familiar in that it is centered around fermentation, brewing, something that people can imagine. It's not a stretch. They've been quite receptive. That being said, and I'll circle back to the point that I made earlier, is that when you're solving a real problem, giving a company or a consumer something that they couldn't have otherwise, or with a kind of feature profile that is impossible to achieve with a source that we're only using because it's present in like the tens of billions, that's when people really can connect. You're doing something that they couldn't get in any other way, and they're delighted when they learn that it's not made from rendered animal waste. That's kind of how we like to build this relationship, which ultimately will arrive at a place of trust, but we have to earn that.
Mm-hmm. And I think to piggyback on that, one of the other ways beyond transparency that we want to build trust is by actually working with organizations who already have that trust for consumers. So whether it's partnering with the WWF about the sustainability piece or doing a life cycle analysis for what we're doing is really working with organizations that already have a lot of credibility and trust with consumers, that when we that can actually vet our process and vet what we're doing, and then having us be able to affiliate ourselves with those kinds of organizations that already are very well respected organizations across the world.
All right, so we're at time. I want to thank DLD for having us here. It was an honor, and thank you guys for coming. I'd recommend anyone after the panel to talk to the panelists here. No matter what industry you're in, biotech is getting involved in all of these. So I really encourage you guys to interact and engage and learn, and then see how you guys can work together. So thank you all for coming.